Take it away.
Okay, well, hello, folks. Bonjour tout le monde. It looks as if we have enough people to get started, so let's begin. Thank you all for coming. This town hall is an opportunity for you all to meet and get to know your North Island Powell River candidate, Jessica Wegg, better for this upcoming federal election happening in April. Election day is April 28th. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of Jessica and myself, and then we'll have Jessica answer your questions. First, some that came in online earlier this week, and then questions from this chat in this Zoom call. So feel free to submit questions there, which we should get to in the next 20 minutes or so. We've got some helpers who will help us fill those questions while we're speaking, and we can keep things rolling. We've kept everybody muted just to minimize any potential unintended disruption, but if we do need clarification on your question, we can unmute you at that time. And then around 5:45, Jessica is going to say a few final words in summary, and I'll wrap things up just so we can keep everything on time. And lastly, I'd like to mention that Jessica has a website, which you're seeing right now. It has her contact information and links to social media pages, Facebook and Instagram. There's also a list of upcoming events. You can see that tab there. And if you'd like to get more involved, you can also volunteer to take a lawn sign and so on. So there are links for all of that also through the website. Okay, now I guess I'll say a little bit about who I am. I'm the official agent for Jessica's campaign, part of her core campaign team. I also have a day job as a quantum computing scientist for Canada Central Bank, the very same one that Mark Carney used to work for. So I also used to be an astrophysicist. I helped discover new galaxies, and I made it to the top 100 candidates in the last CSA astronaut selection in 2016. I'm an avid outdoor enthusiast. I love animals, and I have a large family. My mother lives with me, and I help care for her, so I do understand those some of those issues. And I lived in the States for 8 years, and I am very glad to be back. So Jessica is a fantastic human being. She's exactly who I want fighting in my corner. She is a lawyer that has focused her practice on human rights and civil liberties since her graduation from law school in 2009. She has served in the Green Party shadow cabinet as a critic for international trade. If, like I did, you don't know what a shadow cabinet is, it's a mirror of the government's cabinet whose purpose is to question and challenge their counterpart in the government cabinet, to scrutinize the policies and actions of the government, to keep an eye on them, and also to offer alternative solutions. Jessica has a wonderful family, both two and four-legged children. She's an amazing singer. One of the upcoming events will feature Jessica performing some opera, and I'll save the rest since you're going to learn a lot more about her through the question period. Jessica, do you have anything to add before we begin?
I have nothing to add to that introduction. Thank you so much, Danica. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And if we just wanted to each take a moment and reflect on the Indigenous land where we are all sitting right now, I am so grateful to live and work on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And we live in such a beautiful and diverse area of the world where there are so many different nations, and it would be impossible to list them all now, but I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we are here as guests on stolen land.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, well, with that, I will start with the probably most burning question that anybody who will first meet you wants to know, which is, Jessica, why are you running to represent the people of North Island Powell River federally, and what is motivating you?
I am running to represent the people of North Island, Powell River, because I love where I live and I want to be our representative in Ottawa. I think I am the strongest candidate that we have to go to Ottawa and be in this position right now at this critical time in our nation's history and continuing development, with everything that's going on in the world. I think that the Greens generally are the best prepared to face the climate crisis that we're in. And we are facing multiple crises across different areas of our lives, and we're feeling lots of pressure and stress from different places, particularly south of the border, we're feeling pressure from. And in that regard, I'm the most qualified candidate for that, to deal with the threat from the states as well. I did get my law license in the United States. I practiced in constitutional law almost my entire career. I've sued multiple agencies and organizations of the United States. Using the Constitution to fight the government itself is what I do, and I can take those skills with me to Ottawa. I am motivated to run, as always, by my kids. I I have to stand up for them and think about their futures.
Right. I mean, that's just it. And I think that speaks to a lot of people's motivations for looking beyond the 4-year terms, right? Um, when you have children and grandchildren and you see what's coming, yeah, we know that we need to do more. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Right. Great. Well, thank you for that. It's also very clear and that, the past few years have been difficult financially for the country. What is your plan and the Green Party's plan for addressing the affordability crisis?
Well, one exciting announcement that we came out with this week is our transformative tax plan. And we are proposing to eliminate federal income tax for all personal income up to $40,000, which represents a massive portion of Canadians who don't earn more than that would have no federal income tax to pay. So corporations and very wealthy Canadians are not paying their fair share because they know the loopholes, they can get around the rules that make the rest of us pay, and they aren't paying their fair share. So we will eliminate this tax burden for a huge portion of our communities. And then they will have extra money to spend that will flow back into communities through our small businesses. So this will really tackle the affordability crisis by looking at the systemic inequalities that are causing us to suffer.
Right, great. Those are some awesome points. Uh, how, I mean, you brought this up a little bit already, but, we're again in this very unique time that kind of just was thrust upon us recently with this conflict with the US a bit. So, how would you say that your background uniquely qualifies you to help Canada stand up to Trump and the tariffs and Canadians being detained and so on?
Well, as far as Canadians being detained, when I sue the different government agencies in the United States, a huge portion of that is actually on conditions of confinement. So I know exactly the laws to use. I know how to get the government to abide by the Constitution that it's supposed to abide by. One tricky thing is that this new administration is trying to change everything or doesn't think that the laws apply to them. But you need somebody in Ottawa who knows what the laws are supposed to be and how they're supposed to be followed and what the standards are and how to challenge them and how to make them follow those rules.
Hmm. And our rules here can be quite different from down there, right? Despite the fact that we often see ourselves as quite similar. Is that right?
Yes, in many ways they are quite different. But the US has a long history of the jurisprudence on these constitutional issues that
Hmm.
are about what the power of the government is and what you can do when that power is being used and pushed too far beyond what's acceptable. And that's what I have experience in doing. I don't
Right.
often, when I ran the first time, I didn't talk about my American law practice so much because we were in the middle of COVID, and when I
Right.
moved, there were a lot of anti-American sentiments,
Mm.
and it was, I moved from the States, but I'm a Canadian. I'm originally from Calgary. But now I think it's important to bring up the fact that I did go to law school in America. I practiced for more than a decade in the States, focused on holding the government to account and watching out for these these issues that are infringing on speech, and just arresting people off the streets without probable cause and no reason. So this is what I do.
Yeah, and so how many places are you now have you written the bar exam in in order to qualify?
So I've written the exam in Indiana, which the capital is Indianapolis, Illinois, where you've heard of Chicago. Um,
Mhm.
Also in Ontario, I'm licensed in British Columbia. I'm also licensed to practice in front of several federal courts, as well as the US Supreme Court.
Wow, that's extremely impressive. And I mean, I come from a family of lawyers, so I know what that means, how much that actually would take. So it's really impressive. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to the next question that we got. So, this has come up a few times. Some folks are worried about the issue of splitting the vote. Could you speak to the recent polling statistics and your take on that issue?
Sure, I'm just reading a chat from Cynthia here, and it's right in lines with this. So thanks, Cynthia, for that. Yeah, people are concerned about splitting the vote. We hear it every election, but this year we're hearing it a lot, and people are really, really, really concerned about it, particularly because the conservative candidate can is an off-putting person and is frightening to a lot of people, actually. And the conservative platform is so hateful and angry, and most people don't want this hateful, angry government representing them, and they don't want a hateful, angry MP. Unfortunately, the way that our first past the post system works, this vote splitting happens, and this is how we can go down the hill into a two-party system, which we can see in the States is not a good system. We need to have a thriving system. So a thriving multi-party system. So what I would say to those who are worried about splitting the vote, I hear you. I see the danger of it too. And I am just as upset about the way this election looks like it is going as you are. But we cannot vote from this place of fear. We have to keep showing up with what we believe in and for what we believe in. Looking at the numbers specifically, the Green Party, I wish it was different, isn't the one who's going to be responsible for splitting the vote. If you look at the polls, if you add my projected votes right now, my projected percent to either the NDP or the Liberals, it's still not enough to push the envelope. If I dropped out, it wouldn't make a difference. We would still have the quote unquote left vote split between the Liberals and the NDP. So this is the best time to vote for Greens. And it's really, really important to vote for Greens too when we're in any election. But bear in mind that nationally, we need to get 2% of the vote to maintain official party status. Without that status, we don't get we get hardly any support from Ottawa when we have an MP. We can't participate in debates. Greens already struggle enough to be heard in the media and to be presented in the media. And without that national party status, we would be just nowhere on the map. So we need support. Locally, if we hit 10% of the vote, we get a portion of what we spent during this election back to run again next time. So even if it's a pipe dream that I would get elected this election, and I'm not saying it is, but let's just suspend disbelief for the minute and say, even if it's completely out
I
of
believe.
even if it's completely unbelievable that I would get elected, we would get money back to run again next time. And I am hoping that this next parliament will listen to the Canadians and listen to those of us who are calling out for proportional representation to be heard,
Mm,
so that the next election, people aren't faced with this heartbreaking decision of, I've always been Green, but I'm really scared right now. And they can vote how
right.
they want to vote.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I personally was surprised when I saw some of the stats that, um, you know, so many people in the riding don't actually even vote who could vote. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, that some people are starting to feel a bit disenfranchised and not seen or heard in the system. And it's sort of surprising to learn that if everybody who didn't vote voted for whoever, that person would win. That's how many people aren't voting, right? So that's pretty interesting. Okay. Uh, well, in a kind of a similar vein to what we talked on before around looking to the future, the other parties are again favoring fossil fuel development to boost our economy and seem to be downplaying any climate goals that they may have had. What is the Green Party's position on this?
I don't think that we can panic and throw all of our climate goals out the window because we've got the Trump situation. I think we need to stay level-headed and we need to, again, think long term. Would it be great to just like pull all these resources out of the earth in this next 3 point how many years left we have of this situation, hopefully? I mean, in some ways, maybe, but then what have we done to the earth? What's left if we're already on this trajectory of going off the cliff? And I sometimes argue that we're Wile E. Coyote, we're already off the cliff, we're just running really fast, waiting for
Just over the
gravity.
air. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we
Yeah.
we don't have the time or the luxury
Hmm.
to do that. We can stay focused on our goals. We can capture sunlight, we can capture wind, we can
Hmm.
do these things and make Canada prosperous and have jobs, and 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 we don't need to just panic and stop caring about the environment while we deal with this other issue. We can't start only dealing with one problem at a time. We have to be able to deal with more than one crisis at a time because we live in this multi-crisis universe now.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you don't want to also live in the universe where we eventually get to a place where you can look back and say, I told you so, but it's too late. So,
Exactly. And now we're all
yeah.
living in who knows what bubble.
Hmm. Okay, well, I guess I'll kind of, in a similar vein, take it to a much more focused local, somewhat local issue, uh, which is around fish farming. So that is something that is affecting people in this riding and comes up as a topic of debate in this riding. So, what are your thoughts around the fish farming situation?
Well, I mean, my position is that there can be no salmon farms in the ocean, full stop. We know the damage that they do. We know what they do to our native salmon population and our wild salmon population. They're mostly Atlantic salmon. They bring diseases, they bring parasites. The salmon farming process hurts, like kills our young salmon, our wild, uh, they're swimming past, they get stuck in the nets, they get eaten by the big Atlantic salmon that are there, just gorging themselves. So they need to stay out of the water. Salmon farming doesn't have that many jobs. I mean, there are some, and getting rid of the salmon farms would lose some jobs, but there are way more jobs to be had in our sport fishing and our ecotourism than there are in the salmon farms. And the juice really isn't worth the squeeze. We have seen where the farms have been pulled out of the ocean, the wild salmon are returning and numbers are going up, up, and up. So it's really, really heartwarming to see that because, I mean, you zoom out even farther, those salmon feed the bears, they feed the forest when the bears and the eagles leave the carcasses in the forest. They feed the forest, which cleans our air. So you can't just think about
Right.
salmon
Hmm.
in a contained net. And again, it's not contained properly. But
And even just as an industry, it's not contained, yeah,
yeah, it's
because it
not
affects
contained. It affects
lumber and
everything
yeah.
around us. It's affecting
Hmm.
our whales and from, whales to the timber industry. Exactly. So it can't be seen in
Hmm.
a vacuum, and we need to keep them out of the ocean.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question. Well, I see people are discussing great stuff in the chat. I haven't seen too many questions come through though. So, Cynthia, thank you for your earlier question. If people would like to put in more questions, we can answer them. I mean, I have more, but we want to hear from you, of course, as well, live. Um, okay, well, let's go in a slightly different direction, which is that, you know, uh, a lot of people are very familiar with Elizabeth May, but we have a new co-leader, Jonathan, and you've got to spend some great time with Jonathan. Would you mind telling us a bit more about this other leader that we might have if we were to really go,
Which we do
gangbusters?
have. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Mark's got his hand up, so I'll answer this question
Oh, okay.
and then, so Jonathan Pedno, if you have not had the pleasure of meeting him, is one of the most inspiring people you will ever meet. He has devoted his life to showing up in really hard places and doing the right thing. And now we are so lucky to have him as our co-leader. He is from Quebec. He's running in Outremont. I'm going to see him later this evening, actually, at Paul Manley's launch party. He is really an inspiring person and super smart. And you will see him when he is participating on behalf of the Greens at all of the national debates, which I will add, we will be in the national debates because we do have over 300 nominated candidates now across the country. So that puts us over a threshold that allows us to be in
Woo,
debates. Yeah.
awesome. That's great.
Mm.
Um, okay, well, I see that there is a question about proportional representation. So that would kind of tie in with where even topics we might see discussed at that level in these debates. Can you speak more to, sorry, it's moving on me. uh,
To Annie's question?
Annie's question,
Mhm.
yes.
Sure. There are different ways to do proportional representation. What they did in France recently was they kind of had a runoff between all of the, again, quote unquote, left parties. And whoever won that would run against the right party. So it would have been, in an example would be there would be an earlier election between Tennille and Jennifer and myself, and whoever won that election would go up against Aaron Gunn. Another way to do it would be to be able to have a ranked ballot, and you would say, well, I really want Jessica to win. She's my number one choice, but if she doesn't get enough votes, then my number two choice is whoever. In Germany, they have a system that allows you to pick your candidate, but you also pick what policies and kind of the ideology that you align with. And then they make sure that the government that comes out of an election represents fully what everybody is hoping for. So if the green ideology gets a lot of votes, but the green in that particular city didn't, they somehow, and I don't know the mechanics of it, but they work it out so that everybody's preferences are still represented. Australia still has another way of doing it. So, or New Zealand. So there are lots of different ways to do it, and we just need to, I mean, Trudeau promised it, we didn't get it. We need to hold their toes to the fire on this one and make them change how we are represented. The Greens propose that there would be a group of citizens who work toward deciding how it would work.
Okay, thank you. There is a related question, but I do want to make sure we circle back to Mark's question first, who had his hand up. Can we unmute Mark? I don't think he's typed anything in the chat.
Yes, he has.
Oh, did he? Where is it?
I see Mark DeBruin, I don't see the other Mark question.
Right. I was assuming it was the other Mark that had his hand up.
I can't find, who am I looking for?
Mark Cunningham, did you have a question?
Oh, Mark Cunningham. Okay, I see him.
Yes.
I
Yes.
just couldn't find him. Okay. We're not well set up to do this.
Okay, okay.
There we
Can
go.
you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, Luddite here, and I apologize for wearing this color today because It's the only sweater I could find that was out of the laundry.
No worries.
Yeah. My question concerns the carbon tax. Of course, I was very disappointed to see Mark Carney say that he signed it on his first day in as prime minister. I think most of us affiliated with the Green Party were disappointed to see this disappear. We need to hold the consumers accountable. Climate change is all our business. It isn't just about government. It's not about just the heavy polluters in industry, but it's about our own individual choices in life, right? I drive an EV, and I know that's not for everybody, but and Mark Carney was very big on climate change, and I mean he sold this in Western Europe years ago, well before it came into play in BC here and in Canada. So I was rather disappointed to see that, but politicians will do whatever they have to do to get elected, right? And maybe once he gets in power, we'll see maybe coming back to that. So my question to you, Jessica, I realize the Green Party may be a little ways away from forming government. I think what baby steps are one step at a time. But let's say you get elected as our MP, and this is your first day at question period, and you have a chance to stand up and address the Prime Minister. You're going to say, you cancel the carbon tax, and for one, I think it should have been called a carbon levy, because people in Canada hate the word tax. But what are you going to do, Mr. Prime Minister, about replacing it with some form to ensure that the public, the consumer, is understanding that their choices, what they're doing, like filling up their gas to their car, is causing irreparable harm to our planet? Like, what's the Green Party's policy on any form of a carbon tax coming back into play, or what are you going to hold? How are you going to hold the Prime Minister's feet to the fire on this?
That's a great question, Mark. Thanks for asking. First of all, just you touched on it a little bit about why the Prime Minister did that. I'm pretty sure was to just take the wind out of Poilievre's sails a little bit. So he'd have to replace all of his acts, the tax signs. That's just gamesmanship, I guess. But it did have that effect, right? And probably most people on this call aren't upset that Poilievre had that happen to him. But unfortunately, the carbon tax, yes, he is keeping it in for the big polluters, but unfortunately, it is a really effective tool that we can use, and it works. And we think that the carbon tax, and I like your word levy, for those who are afraid of the word tax. I mean, it does work, and there needs to be something like that in place. I think a lot of Canadians, when they realize that it might save them some money at the pump, but they're not getting the money back that they were getting before, they kind of will start to see how it worked and be less opposed to the idea. So it's a great tool. It's one that empirically we know works. So we need to find a way to bring it back.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. So from there, I'm going to go back to the next question that came up in the chat, which was back to the sort of strategic voting theme. Somebody commented that I think that a lot of people do not understand how first past the post works. They think voting Liberal is the safest bet to beat the Conservatives and do not understand that this is not the case in Nipper. Do you have any suggestions for how we can educate people on this matter during the election?
I think that politics can be very confusing for a lot of people. So I think, we always want to meet people where they are. And sometimes what might be completely obvious to you is somebody had just never thought of before. That this federal election, we're not voting for the prime minister. In the parliamentary system, we vote for a representative. Just starting there and working your way up. So while we're not voting, it's not, you don't have to choose between Polyev and Carney. You're choosing who you want to represent the North Island Powell River, and these are the options. I think a great tool for talking to people about the strategic voting and how first past the post works is to pull up, 338 Canada isn't the most reliable metric that there is, but it does break it down by riding, and it is easy to read, and the graphics are very clear. So if you brought that up on your phone and said, hey, look, here are the numbers, it's a really clear bar chart. The way this works is that even though you can see that the NDP and the Liberals, and to a small extent the Greens, are clearly like 60% of the people in this riding support one of these parties, they're not going to get heard because the other 40% is in one person. And so just kind of step by step explaining it, what you brought up earlier, Danica, with the people who don't vote. I think a great way to talk to people about voting Green if they're nervous is to say, hey, I get it, I hear you, acknowledge their fear, because it is a fear that we all have, and say, we can grow the vote. We don't need to split it. Let's go find 2 or 3 people who don't usually vote at all and get them to, and talk to them about voting Green, and to just kind of like be accountable to each other and say, we're all going to do this, and by that way expand the vote. I also think there are a lot of conservatives who could be convinced to vote Green if they knew more about what Greens are. For example, a lot really respond well when they find out that Greens aren't whipped. So we don't have to do what our party leader tells us to do from her place in Saanich or from Montreal, or things that, if Mike Morris has an idea for what works in Ontario, it doesn't mean it works for us here, and we can all vote how our constituents want us to vote versus how we're told to vote, which is different than any other party.
Right, yeah. And actually, I mean, on top of that, I'd say another appealing aspect of the Green platform that I think maybe, I mean, I wasn't aware of until recently, is that the Green Party is the only platform that's fully costed. So in that sense, it's actually fiscally conservative in this, that there's a budget to stick to how we would pay for what we would do, right?
That's exactly right. Yes, we're the only party, and our platform is right now in the process of, they're working with the Parliamentary Budget Office, and they go through line by line our entire platform and figure out, is this feasible? How would you pay for this? And so when we come up with policies and we share them, they're not just pie in the sky things that we can say because or just the Greens will just say whatever we want for the environment. They're doable and they will work for Canada. And when we have people behind us who can see that this is not only an exciting, dramatic idea, it's completely feasible, and they've shown how they can pay for it, that has a lot of power.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. So I think you're right that there could be some appeal even to, conservatives that you wouldn't think would normally be swayed to the Green cause. So, might still be worth having those conversations, open conversations with friends. Maybe in Canada, we can keep that kind of dialogue going with, where people can talk about these, differences of opinion with our friends without coming to fisticuffs. Okay, I just want to go back to just recognize that it was Cody Webb who submitted the question around the first past the post and suggestions on how we could educate people on that matter. Sorry, Cody, I lost the name as it was scrolling along for me. Okay, let's talk about now in these final 10 minutes. Let's talk about infrastructure in the riding. So if you were to get in, are there specific pieces of infrastructure in the riding that you would like to see addressed, improved, or removed, possibly?
Tell me more about what you mean by infrastructure specifically.
I'm not sure. It could be anything from roads and bridges and dams and things like that to, schools,
Well, a lot
healthcare
of it falls
institutions.
under, so yeah, and the reason I asked was because a lot of it falls under provincial or municipal control. Um, I can, and here's, if you've ever driven on a road in the States, our roads are immaculate. Like, every time we have family come up and visit, they're like, holy smokes, your roads are so nice. And they lose tires in the potholes in the States all the time. So, so yeah, I think that there's a lot of healthy infrastructure. I think that we need to make sure that everyone in the North Island Powell River and on all for all Indigenous communities across Canada, I cannot wrap my head around the fact that there are still water boiling advisories in effect and that they have to ship water in. That to me is completely untenable and unacceptable. And I just don't get it. I mean, water is a human right, so everybody should have it. And in Canada, where we have a lot of it, we cannot have people without healthy drinking water and clean drinking water. So that's kind of Canada-wide. I think some of our infrastructure could use some updating in the normal course of business, and just in the normal course of things, I should say. But I think otherwise everything, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But if anybody else can, I would be really interested in hearing it.
Well, and I think, I mean, just to that end, it's good to be clear on what your purview is and where the buck stops on the issues that you control versus provincial or municipal. So that's helpful to know, I think, for people, right?
Mhm.
Okay. We have a question from Benjamin Fairless. What should the maximum legal interest on loans be?
I think I should ask you this, Danica. You work for the Bank of Canada. I
Right.
saw this question. I don't have a number, but I will say this. We need to get banks under control. There are only a few of them in Canada versus, for example, in the States, there are hundreds or thousands of different banks, which means there's a monopoly the banks hold, and they can basically do whatever they want. Like TD recently got a multi-billion-dollar, I think, fine for some nefarious things that they were doing, but they're still operating. Like, this isn't normal that we can just levy fines for people to that degree and be like, oh, but we're pretty sure you're doing everything else fine, so we'll just let you go. We need to have a discussion about what's fair and what's reasonable and how much power the banks can have, because right now it's too much, and that is something that the federal government can do. And other than that, I am happy to take your question to the shadow cabinet and find out if we have a number in our platform. Not everything in our platform has been released yet, but I can definitely share that with you if I find out about it.
Well, right. And so I think there's an assumption that the Green Party always wants to increase regulation. But in fact, in some instances, there might be reason to reduce some regulation in the sense that, okay, having this oligarchy of financial institutions in our country might keep things more stable. We don't have banks that are collapsing every other day. But maybe there's a better balance where if we had more financial institutions and more competition in that realm, then that would lead to a more productive economy and more, small business opportunity and investments and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think it's important that we have these discussions, and we recognize what the problems are and where they are, and and yeah, I was going to make a point out in the Old Testament they talk about how much interest is acceptable, but hopefully we would move past the Old Testament way of running things.
I mean, I think in a sense, if things are working well otherwise in the economy, then it doesn't need to be quite so regulated because it'll sort of self manage, maybe. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's going to sound like a wishy-washy answer because it is, but there needs to be a balance between government regulation and sort of market freedom, I would call it. But I think the government needs to remember that its job is, one of its main jobs is to look out for its people. And when it starts letting businesses tell it what to do and run things, that's a problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, and there are many levers to pull, right? Sometimes there are these red herrings that people have you focus on when there are other levers that can be pulled in the system. Would you say that's been your experience?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, great. Um, okay, let's see. So, oh, why does it keep doing this where it scrolls away on me? Okay, so I thought Teresa had another question, but it seems it's chat. So Annie asked, what does the Green Party propose to actually do to assist workers from resource-based economy jobs to transfer their skills to green economy jobs? It's a great
Well,
question.
it's a great question. And so let's just imagine, for example, the Alberta oil field workers who now we're saying, well, we're going to leave the oil in the ground. Now you're out of a job. The Greens are proposing high-paying, well-paying jobs and paid training to transfer those skills to a renewable resource if they wanted to stay in the same field of energy, for example. So take that oil field worker and give him or her paid training and then a well-paying job guaranteed in the renewable industry. So nobody is left behind.
Great. Gosh, so many issues are coming up. There's actually, there's a lot, and somebody spoke to this in the chat, how it's actually very broad and diverse, and we can't just, hammer things with like one tool like axe the tax. That, there is nuance to, obviously, society is complex and countries are complex. So there are a lot of different issues. So there's another one that's come up around Palestine.
Hi.
There wasn't, I didn't see
Yeah, they kind of just say
Palestine policy.
Palestine, yeah.
Is that something that actually, I mean, are we able to, are you able to have an impact on that, first of all?
I think so. Is it in the federal purview? Absolutely. I think we need to have a strong response to the genocide that's happening in Palestine. I think that for those people who are not calling it a genocide, and there's a lot because there's a lot of anxiety over being also called anti-Semitic. I think that, again, there's education that can be done here, and just by pointing out that the Netanyahu government of Israel is committing a genocide in Palestine does not mean that you're anti-Semitic, and we need to just say what it is and be brave and say what it is. And I have been for the past several months working with Greens around the world. I'm in almost weekly contact with the leader of the Green Party of Lebanon. And we have monthly meetings with Greens from Lebanon. We've had Syria, Italy, Australia, Indonesia. It's a nightmare trying to plan a Zoom call because every time zone is represented. Somebody's waking up at 4 a.m. to join this Zoom call. But we are working on how we can pressure our governments to stop arms contracts with Israel. The Australian Greens were really successful at this. They had several contracts canceled because of pressure they put on their government. So we're training Greens around the world to go to their representatives and how, like, first of all, how to find the contracts, how to go to their representatives and challenge them and say this needs to stop. The Greens have a strong policy, would support, the Greens are calling for a arms embargo. The trouble is, then if you really want to get into the weeds, you say, okay, we're not giving Israel any arms, but then you switch to another country. India, for example, will just fill in the gaps. So you continue trading arms with India and they'll just give what you're giving them, sell them to Israel. So anyway, it's a lot of work, but there are things that we can do. We start by naming it a genocide and not being afraid. Does this mean that this is the only genocide happening in the world? No. Go to Genocide Watch. There are a lot happening, but this is the one we've watched all unfold on social media, the one we've had nightmares about. This is the one that needs attention. And it's very clear to me, and I don't think Israel is making any bones about it, that it wants to kill or displace every Palestinian. So there you go, it's a genocide. So yeah, the federal government can do something. I've been so inspired by Irish parliamentarians who just have zero tolerance for this. And I think we need to have more of that courage in Parliament here.
Absolutely. I mean, at the policy level, absolutely. I mean, it's of course tragic, and as with every war, innocent people are being hurt on both sides. But yeah, I mean, it's good to know that within the world, other countries can do things to help these kinds of very distressing situations. Okay, well, originally we had stated that this would be the time where we would start wrapping up and summarizing, but I will just sneak one more question in, one or two, we'll see. So there was a question around how the Greens will specifically help to alleviate the housing shortage and unaffordability.
Yes, so the Greens are calling, my short answer is the Greens want to get the government back into business of building housing. We are proposing the biggest influx of government housing since the 1970s. And if you want to get the contracts to build government housing, you're going to need to make sure through covenants that the housing stays affordable. You cannot use market rates to determine what's affordable. You have to look at people's income and meet them where they are. So the Greens are calling for affordability to be people are paying no more than 30% of their income on their housing. Outside of that, it's not going to be considered affordable, and you don't qualify for the government contracts to build the houses.
Okay, thank you. Final question, also one that's quite, I think, in particular specific to this riding, around old growth logging. So would you mind speaking to that issue, and then we will get to summarizing final points?
Happy to, and I'll start with a rather disappointing answer maybe. Forestry is really provincial. There's not much the federal government does with forestry. We can impact it through Endangered Species Act, for example. My personal position is that old growth logging needs to end, period. But again, there's only so much that the federal government can do in that regard. Logging generally, one, I think, fantastic idea of the Greens is we want to stop shipping our raw logs overseas to be processed. We can create jobs and expand the timber industry in British Columbia. And if we're opening the mills and processing our lumber here, again, not old growth lumber, but the second growth, the trees that we are cutting down, we can process them here and keep the jobs here, and not be exporting raw materials.
Great. Well, I mean, I think one thing that I love hearing about is the clarity around, what levels of government are responsible for what, because this makes me a bit of ashamed to say, but I didn't, I wasn't really taught this in school, which I feel like in hindsight we should be. And so learning more about, what's happening at the different levels and who is really responsible for what has been very eye-opening for me personally, as I've gotten more involved with and, learning from you guys. So thank you so much for that. Okay, well, this has been a really great chat. Lots of good questions. Obviously, people can continue to send any further questions that may occur to you through the links that we brought up earlier, and I'll talk about that again at the end in upcoming events. But Jessica, do you want to give kind of a final summary of anything that you just feel like is, really important to you and to convey to your, potential constituents in this riding, and and just anything we might not have touched on?
Sure. I just see one comment in the chat I'm going to respond to. Teresa said, Hamas has a long history of I'm guessing Semitism. Is that right, Teresa, that you were going to say? It just says anti-dash. Oh yeah, here we go. Anti-Semitic action devoted to the annihilation of Jews. Hamas is right now winning the propaganda war. I am not saying Hamas is innocent in what is going on. It is a complex situation. But the UN even has investigated it and has stated that a genocide is occurring. I think that it's important we don't deny that. I'm not saying Hamas is innocent. It's not. But this is a genocide in Palestine. I think that's most of the questions that we hit. So I just want to thank everyone for coming and asking these thoughtful questions. I think that it's really important we have these meetings and that we keep these dialogues open. Some of the things are hard to talk about, and we're going to disagree on them. What I love about Canada, one of the many things, is that we can have these conversations and we can disagree on things, but recognize still there are a lot more things that we do agree on and that we can find common ground on. And we can have these hard conversations. We can be on completely different sides of the planet on some issues, but we're still going to meet each other. We'll still wave at each other when we see each other. And we're not going to let this hatred that is so insipid and dangerous separate us from what is important, which is recognizing that we are living in a really complex world now. We are living in a very complex time, and we are all just trying our best to make the world as beautiful and safe for everyone as we can. And that is what we need to think about when we're going into this election, when we see each other at the store, when we look at each other's lawn signs and like, oh, you're one of those. We have those feelings on the inside, but we're not going to be jerks to each other. And I think that's so important, because no matter what you think on a lot of these issues, you will agree that the way that we pull through this together is by coming together as a community and really finding that common ground and working with each other and talking through the things that we disagree on. And maybe we're just always going to disagree, but recognizing that that's okay. And we need to focus on what our goal is and working there together.
Right. Awesome. How do you find the best solution if you don't have all the cards on the table, right? In that vein, in that spirit, there are some upcoming all candidates debates. I don't know if we want to specifically call them out in the different areas within the riding. There's one.
There are a great many of them. I'll have to pull them down.
So
I think the first
Larry,
one's
Larry, do you want to bring up the events page again of the upcoming events? Thank you so much. So in these debates, all candidates debates, I mean, you've got to hear a lot of Jessica's thoughts on different topics and ask her questions directly now, but obviously you'll be hearing all the different platforms from the different candidates within the riding and their thoughts on the questions that are posed there. I'm not sure, as in the all candidates debates, are there any sort of open question sessions? Or is it
sometimes there are. It depends on who's putting it on. They usually will have like a set of questions that every candidate receives. And then sometimes they open up to the floor to ask every candidate a couple of questions, or just anybody can ask any candidate a question. Sometimes the candidates get to ask the other candidates questions. So it just really depends on who's putting it on.
Okay, great. So yeah, if everybody, keep your eye on this events page. There's also a similar version on Jessica's Facebook page under the About section. So it looks like there was one, well, you probably know better than I do, Jessica.
Yeah, so I think the first one is in Alert Bay, and that one is the 8th, I believe. No, not the 8th. It's the, hang on, I'm trying to look through I'll just go on. Well, there it is. The 13th in Alert Bay. The first one is in Campbell River, sorry. And that's earlier. Yeah, that's the 6th. So that's the first one. Then there's one in Alert Bay. We've got one in Powell River. We've got a couple in Comox. So there will be one near you. And I know that in Comox, for example, is live streamed. So you can, if you can't get to one, there will still be ways to view them.
Okay, great. So many opportunities for people to really get into the weeds of people's take on the different issues. We also have some, as I mentioned before, some fun events. There's one where Jessica will be singing. That's April 4th at the Comox United Church. There's also a related but separate event, which is a reception fundraiser, which will include Elizabeth May. It's the same evening. In the same place, but different event. I see also Cynthia talked about April 2nd, there's a meet and greet in Powell River.
Yep.
And we've done some movie nights already, and there may be more coming up. So keep your eye on that. And as we talked about earlier, if you want to get involved, there are multiple ways to do that, and you can do so through this page. And that's about it, unless I'm forgetting anything.
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you all once again.
Oh,
Have
my
a great
hash,
night.
if on Facebook and Instagram, it's Jessica Wegg Nipper for both of those. If you search for all one word, you'll get me. Yep.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank
you,
you.
Jessica.
Thanks, Danica.
Thank you both.
Bye.